Chair and the Lenape people, dignitaries and all our Indigenous family. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Marama Pala and I am from the Ngāti people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, Māori. And I have lived with HIV for 24 years. I am here to tell you Indigenous men, women and children are living with HIV, and this number is growing exponentially. So much so now that we have a global movement called the International Indigenous HIV and AIDS community. Many Indigenous communities fear us and discriminate against us, that we live with institutionalised stigma within our own communities. This is unacceptable in a time where fear, stigma and discrimination is unnecessary. In June 2016, here at the high-level meeting on HIV, Indigenous people were mentioned twice in the 2016 political declaration on HIV and AIDS. Nation states must work towards the accurate representation of Indigenous peoples in all HIV and AIDS epidemiological data. Collaborative action using accurate data must be Indigenous driven, and this is often overlooked key affected population. Research should lead to policies that address stigma, discrimination, self-determination and racism, and ensuring housing, educational and economic opportunities that support building resilience for Indigenous communities. Indigenous health and rights must be ingrained in all policy so that resources match the need for Indigenous peoples to design, develop and implement HIV and AIDS programs. Countries, donors and international communities and the UN must support funding for the Indigenous people's response. Therefore, we recommend that the UN PFII, UN AIDS and all the 11 UN agency co-sponsors, especially UN PFII and UN Women, host an expert group meeting on HIV and AIDS, including the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples living with and affected by HIV, taking into account the social and economic and cultural determinants of health for HIV prevention, care and treatment in Indigenous populations, especially as they relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. Paramount to the AIDS response has been the powerful role of communities. Ending AIDS by 2030 will be impossible if the Indigenous peoples are left behind. Getting to zero means addressing equity in resources for Indigenous peoples' prevention, treatment and response programs and policy in all countries. Despite all the advances in HIV, despite all the goals and strategies, despite all goodwill, despite the UNAIDS 1990 Fast Track Strategy, despite the UNAIDS Gap Report, identifying all those left behind, I'm here to tell you that Indigenous people have been left behind, and unless things change, we will continue to be left behind, and 10-10-10 is our reality. Therefore, we recommend that the Permanent Forum, in cooperation with UNAIDS, work to integrate the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples throughout UNAIDS and co-sponsoring UN agencies, as well as the international Indigenous HIV and AIDS community, utilising a system-wide action plan.